A boot slammed against the boarded door and the rotted wood caved in. Dust rolled out in a gray cloud. A three-legged dog barked once, then bolted into the dark. Inside, the floor groaned under heavy weight. A hand ripped a plank loose and threw it aside. Another plank. Then another. Sunlight cut into a room that hadn't seen it in 10 years. Boot prints pressed into a decade of grime. The man wiped his face with a torn sleeve and stared at a rusted hatch in the floor. His name was Elias Kowalski, though every man who knew him called him Wrench. He had $10 to his name that morning. By nightfall, he had none. What he found under that hatch would leave a room full of hard men standing dead silent, unable to speak. Nobody in that town saw it coming. Stay with me on this one. Now here's the thing about Wrench Kowalski. He was 51 years old that spring and he had nothing. No house. No savings. A bike that ran on prayer and stolen parts. His hands were the kind of hands that had fixed 1,000 engines and never once held a bank account with more than $50 in it. He rode with a small club out of Kingman, Arizona. 9 men. They called themselves the Road Saints, which was a joke, because none of them were saints and half of them had done time. But they were his. That's the part that mattered. The club had lost their clubhouse 3 months back. The landlord sold the lot to a developer, and just like that, 9 men had nowhere to sit, nowhere to drink, nowhere to wrench on their bikes out of the sun. They started meeting behind a gas station. Grown men standing around a trash can fire pretending it was fine. It wasn't fine. Wrench watched the group start to drift. Guys stopped showing up. When men don't have a roof to gather under, they scatter. He knew that. He'd seen clubs die that way before. So when he heard about the old Roadhouse out on the highway, something clicked in his chest. Everybody in Kingman knew the place. The Coyote Roadhouse, they used to call it. Sat about 4 miles out of town on a dead stretch of Route 66, back when that road still meant something. It had been boarded up for 10 years. The story went that the old owner just up and vanished one night, left the beer in the taps and the chairs on the tables and never came back. Some said he ran off with money he owed. Some said worse. The county slapped a lien on it, the bank took it, and for a decade it just sat there rotting in the desert sun while the tumbleweeds piled against the door. The bank wanted it gone, off the books, so they put it up for a token sale. $10 cash, as is, no inspection, no promises. The clerk actually laughed when Wrench walked in with a crumpled $10 bill and asked to buy it. "You know that place is a death trap, right?" she said. "Roofs caving, no water, no power, might have snakes." "I've lived worse," Wrench said, and he had. He'd slept in ditches, he'd slept in county lockup. A snake didn't scare a man like that. He signed the paper. She stamped it. And that fast, Elias Kowalski owned a building for the first time in his life. He walked out into the parking lot with the deed folded in his jacket, and he stood there a long minute just looking at the sky. Diesel was waiting by the bike. That was the dog. Big German Shepherd, black and tan, missing his back left leg from a run-in with a truck 2 winters ago. Wrench had found him bleeding in a ditch and paid a vet with money he didn't have and never once regretted it. Diesel didn't need 4 legs. He got around fine on 3, and he never left Wrench's side. Not once. The rest of the club thought Wrench had lost his mind. $10 for a pile of firewood, said Bull, the big one, the road captain. That's real smart, Wrench, real smart. It's got walls, Wrench said. It's got a roof mostly. It's ours. Nobody can sell it out from under us. You want to keep meeting behind a chevron the rest of your life. Nobody had an answer for that. So the next Saturday, the whole club rode out to the Coyote Roadhouse to see what $10 had bought them. And that's where our story really starts. The place was worse than they thought. The roof sagged in the middle like a swayback horse. Birds had nested in the rafters. The bar was still there, thick with dust, and behind it a cracked mirror threw back their reflections like ghosts. The floor was soft in spots. You had to test each step. Bull put his boot through a board within the first minute and cussed loud enough to scare the pigeons out. But under the dust and the rot, you could see what it used to be. A real place. A place where people gathered. There were still initials carved into the bar top. Still a jukebox in the corner, dead and silent. Still a hand-painted sign on the wall that said "All riders welcome. No exceptions." Wrench ran his fingers over that sign and felt something he couldn't name. They spent the whole day clearing junk. 9 men and a 3-legged dog hauling rotten furniture out into the lot, sweeping 10 years of desert grit into the sun. It felt good. It felt like the club had a heartbeat again. Somebody found the old taps still had pressure. Somebody else found a case of glasses, unbroken, wrapped in newspaper from 1977. They were laughing by afternoon, really laughing, and Wrench stood in the doorway watching his brothers act like brothers again and thought, $10. Best $10 I ever spent. That's when Diesel started scratching at the floor. The dog was over in the back corner behind where the kitchen used to be, digging at a spot in the boards and whining low in his throat. Wrench walked over. He nudged the dog aside with his knee and swept the grime away with his boot. There it was. A hatch. Iron, rusted almost solid, set flush into the floor with a heavy ring pull. Somebody had nailed boards across it years ago, but the nails had rusted to nothing. "Hey," Wrench called out. "Bull, get over here." It took 3 of them and a pry bar to get it open. The hinges screamed. When the hatch finally swung back, a breath of cool air came up out of the dark, and with it a smell like old stone and time. A wooden ladder went straight down into black. "I'm not going down there," said Tors, the youngest. "That's how you die in a horror movie." Wrench grabbed a flashlight off his bike. "Then stay up here, kid." He went down first. Of course he did. Diesel whined at the top, unable to follow on 3 legs, so one of the men carried the dog down after because that dog was not going to let Wrench out of his sight for anything. The cellar was bigger than he expected. Dry, cool, cut right into the hard desert ground and lined with stone. The flashlight beam swept across the room and Wrench stopped breathing for a second. The place was full. Crates. Wooden crates stacked along one wall, stenciled with faded military markings. A folded flag in a triangle case, sitting on a shelf, coated in dust but perfect underneath. Photographs in frames, dozens of them, propped up like a little shrine. A pair of combat boots, polished once, set neat side by side. And in the middle of it all, a green military footlocker with a heavy padlock, and on top of the footlocker, a leather-bound book. Nobody said a word. The whole club had come down the ladder by then, crowding into that cool stone room, and every one of them just went quiet, because you could feel it. This wasn't junk. This was somebody's life, packed away and hidden and waiting. Wrench picked up the book. It was a ledger, handwritten. He opened it under the flashlight and started reading, and the dust motes hung in the beam like they were holding still to listen. The first page had a name at the top, Raymond Alcott, and under it, in careful block letters, the Coyote. What is OWED and what is given? Wrench turned the page, and then he stood very still. He carried that ledger back up the ladder into the light because he needed to see it plain, and the club followed him up one by one, quiet as church. He sat down on an overturned crate in the middle of the old barroom, and Diesel put his head on Wrench's knee, and the sun came down through the broken roof, and for a moment everything was calm. Real calm. The kind of calm that fools you. Because here's what Wrench believed in that moment. He believed the hard part was over. He believed he'd bought a building for $10, found a dead man's belongings, and the worst of it was that he'd have to figure out who to call. A sad story with a tidy ending. He set the ledger on his knee and let out a long breath and thought, "We did good today." He even smiled. Bull cracked open one of those 1977 glasses and poured a warm beer and handed it over, and Wrench took a sip, and the whole club settled in around him like the day was done. It wasn't done. It was about to turn into something else entirely. Tors, the kid, had drifted back to the hatch. He'd found a smaller box down there, tucked behind the footlocker, and he came up the ladder holding it and reading a paper he'd found inside, and his face had gone white as bone. "Wrench," he said, his voice cracked. "Wrench, you need to read this." He held out a single, yellowed newspaper clipping. And when Wrench read it, the beer went sour in his mouth, and the calm shattered like that glass hitting stone. The clipping was from the Kingman paper, 10 years old. The headline read, "Local business owner dies owing thousands, bank seizes Roadhouse," and there was a photo. A lean old man in a cavalry hat standing in front of the coyote, arms crossed, half smiling. Raymond Alcott, the owner who everybody said vanished. He didn't vanish. That was the lie the whole town had believed for 10 years. Raymond Alcott died alone in that cellar. He'd gone down there one winter night, the coroner figured, sat down among his dead friends and his packed-away life, and his heart simply stopped. Nobody found him for 2 weeks. And because he owed the bank money, because he'd been late on payments, the story that grew up around it wasn't a story of a lonely old man. It was a story of a deadbeat who ran out on his debts. The bank foreclosed. The town shrugged. And they nailed boards over a man's whole life and called it a bad investment. But here's where it turned, and here's the part that changed everything. Wrench opened that ledger again, passed the first page, and started reading the names. Because the ledger wasn't a record of what people owed Raymond Alcott. Read it again. What is OWED and what is given? It was a record of what Raymond Alcott had given away. Free, page after page, meals, beds, tanks of gas, every entry in that careful block hand. A drifter fed for 3 days in the winter of '71. A widow's tab wiped clean. A broke rider given $20 and a hot plate and sent on his way. And the names. Wrench's throat went tight because he started recognizing the names. Every one of them was a road saint. There it was in black ink. Bull's name, William Braddock, fed and housed for a week in the spring of 1975, when he was a young man on the run with nothing. Tor's father, dead now, given a job washing dishes when no one else in the county would hire an ex-con. And there near the middle in Raymond Alcott's steady hand, Elias Kowalski, 19 years old, fed, housed, given $40 and a set of tools when he rolled into Kingman broke and half-starved on a busted bike back in the winter of 1955. Wrench sat there and could not speak. He remembered it. Suddenly he remembered all of it. A lean man in a cavalry hat who'd taken one look at a starving teenager and said, "Sit down, son, you eat first, we'll talk money never." He'd never known the man's name. He'd been too proud and too hungry to ask. He ate, he slept, he took the tools, and he rode out at dawn and never came back, and he had carried those very tools for 32 years without once knowing who to thank. The man who'd saved him was the man rotting in that cellar. The man the whole town called a deadbeat. Wrench's hands were shaking. And that, right there, is the moment this stopped being a story about a cheap building and became something that would haunt every man in that room for the rest of his life. If you're still with me, and I hope you are, do me one favor, hit that subscribe button, because what comes next is the reason I wanted to tell you this story at all, and you're going to want to be here for it. Now the conflict had changed. Understand that. An hour before, the problem was a leaky roof and a pile of junk. Now the problem was a debt across time, owed by 9 living men to one dead one and no way on earth to pay it back. You can't buy a dead man a meal. You can't hand $40 back to a triangle folded flag. Wrench sat there with the ledger open on his knees and felt the weight of 32 years pressing down on him, and it was heavier than any engine he'd ever lifted. Bull was reading over his shoulder now, and the big man made a sound Wrench had never heard him make. Bull, who'd broken jaws and served 4 years and never cried at his own mother's funeral, was standing there with his eyes wet, staring at his own name in a dead man's book. "He fed me," Bull whispered. "I forgot. I swear to God, Wrench, I forgot his face. And he wrote me down. He wrote me down like I mattered." That's when Wrench looked back at the footlocker down in the cellar, the one with the heavy padlock, the one thing they hadn't opened. He went back down the ladder. All of them did. And Bull put the pry bar to that padlock and leaned on it with everything he had, and the lock snapped and the lid came up. On top there was a letter. A single envelope sealed and written across the front in that same block hand, one word. Riders, just that. Riders, like the old man knew. Like he always knew that someday, someway, the men he'd fed would find their way back down into that dark. Wrench's hands weren't steady. He broke the seal. He unfolded the pages. And by the light of one flashlight in that cold stone room, with 9 hard men holding their breath and a 3-legged dog pressed against his leg, Elias Kowalski read a dead man's last words out loud. "If you're reading this," Wrench read, "then I'm gone and you found the way down, and that means you're one of mine. Maybe I fed you once. Maybe I fed your father, doesn't matter. If you're standing in this cellar, you're family, and family is the only thing I ever managed to keep. I never had children, never had a wife that stayed. What I had was the road and the men who rode it, and this bar where any rider was welcome, no exceptions. You saw the sign. I meant it. I meant every word of it for 40 years. The town thinks I'm a fool, I know that. They think I gave away everything I had, and they're right, I did. I fed men who couldn't pay because once, a long time back, a man fed me when I couldn't pay, and I made him a promise I'd pass it on. So I did. Every rider that came through hungry I fed. Every one of them I wrote down, not because they owed me. Because I wanted to remember that I'd kept my word." Wrench stopped. He had to. His voice had gone rough. Bull put a hand on his shoulder and nodded for him to go on. "Now here's the part they got wrong. They think I died broke. Let them think it. I owed the bank on this building because I stopped taking money from the men who came through, and a business that gives everything away can't make a payment. But I wasn't broke. I was never broke. I just didn't keep it where a bank could find it." "Lift the tray." Wrench looked down into the footlocker. There was a shallow wooden tray sitting in the top of it, holding the old man's medals and a folding knife, and a photo of a young Raymond Alcott in an army uniform, grinning, 19 years old and immortal. Wrench lifted the tray out with both hands, and the whole club went silent. Underneath was money, cash, banded in tight bricks filling the bottom of that footlocker to the brim. Old bills, careful and clean, decades of a man quietly setting aside what he could and never spending a dime of it on himself. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Tors made a small sound and sat down hard on the stone floor. Wrench kept reading because the letter wasn't done, and his voice was barely a whisper now. "I figure it's near $40,000 down there, give or take. I saved it my whole life for one reason. I always meant to fix this place up. Make it right. Make it a real home for riders, a place that would still be standing and still be free long after I was gone. I ran out of time. My heart's not what it was, and I can feel it, and I think this is the last winter I'll see this cellar. So I'm giving it to you, whoever you are, whatever your name is, on one condition, and I mean it the way I meant that sign on the wall. You don't keep it for yourself. You use it to open these doors again. You put riders under this roof. You feed the ones who come through hungry, no exceptions, and when one of them can't pay, you write his name in the book and you let it go. And someday, when you're old and your heart's giving out, you leave what's left for the next man to find. That's how you pay me back. That's the only way. Keep it going. Keep the door open." Keep the light on for the ones still out there on the road with nothing. That's all I ever wanted, a place that outlived me. Don't let them nail it shut again. Raymond Alcott, the coyote, all riders welcome, no exceptions. Wrench folded the letter, and for a long moment nobody in that cellar said anything at all. You could hear the wind moving over the broken roof up above. You could hear Diesel's tail thump once against the stone. 9 grown men, hard men, men with prison ink and broken knuckles, stood in a dead man's cellar and wept, and not one of them tried to hide it. Bull was the first to speak. He wiped his face with the back of his big hand and looked at the money and then at Wrench, and his voice was thick. 40 grand, he said. Wrench. That's a lot of money. That's more money than this whole club has ever seen. We could split that 9 ways and every one of us could walk out of here and never worry again. The cellar went quiet again because it was true, and every man there knew it was true. $40,000 split 9 ways was a fresh start for men who'd never had one. It was a truck that ran. It was rent paid a year ahead. It was, for some of them, the most money they'd ever hold at once. Wrench looked around at their faces in the flashlight glow. He looked at the folded flag and the polished boots and the photo of a 19-year-old boy in an army uniform who'd grown into an old man who fed strangers until it killed his business. He looked at his own name in the ledger. Elias Kowalski, 19 years old, fed, housed, given $40 and a set of tools. The same tools he'd carried for 32 years. The tools were still in his saddlebag up top. He'd fixed 1,000 bikes with them and never once known whose kindness they came from. No, Wrench said, quiet, but it filled the whole cellar. He stood up. Diesel stood with him. That man fed me when I was a kid dying on the side of the road, and I never even asked his name. He fed your father, Tors. He fed you, Bull, when the whole state wanted you in a cage. He wrote us down, every one of us, not because we owed him, because he wanted to remember he'd kept his word to somebody who fed him once a long time back. You understand what that is? That's a chain. That chain is 50, 60 years long. It ran through this cellar and it ran through us, and we didn't even know we were on it. He held up the letter. He didn't ask us to get rich. He asked us to keep the door open, and I'll be damned, I will be damned if I break a chain that old for a truck that runs. He looked around the room, and one by one, he watched their faces change. Watched the want drain out of them and something else come in. Something they hadn't felt in a long time, maybe ever. The feeling of being asked to be better than you are, and deciding, right there in the dark, that you would be. We fixed the roof, Wrench said. We opened the doors, we put the sign back up. All riders welcome, no exceptions. And when somebody rolls in here hungry and broke, the way I rolled in here in '55, we feed him, and we write his name in the book, and we let it go. And we keep it going till we're the old men who don't wake up one morning. And then we leave what's left for the next crew to find. Bull looked at the money a long moment. Then he looked at his own name in the ledger, in the dead man's careful hand. And the biggest, hardest man in the Road Saints reached down, closed the footlocker lid, and set the pry bar on top of it like he was closing a coffin with respect. All riders welcome, Bull said. No exceptions. Yeah, let's do it right. And that was that. 9 votes, no argument. In a cellar in the Arizona ground, over a dead man's fortune, the Road Saints chose the harder thing, and they chose it together. They buried Raymond Alcott properly that month. Turned out the county had cremated him 10 years back and left the ashes unclaimed in a cardboard box in a storage room, because nobody came for a deadbeat. The Road Saints came for him. All 9 in full colors, and they rode his ashes out to the coyote, and they buried him under the big cottonwood behind the Roadhouse, and Wrench carved the marker himself. It didn't say deadbeat. It didn't say the man who ran out on his debts. It said, Raymondalcott. He fed us all, no exceptions. The whole town heard about it eventually. The clipping got passed around. The truth came out that the man they'd called a fool for 10 years had died broke on paper only, that he'd given his fortune to the men he'd fed, that he'd made them promise to keep the door open. And Kingman, which had laughed at Wrench for spending $10, went quiet in a way a town does when it realizes it got a man's whole life wrong. They fixed the roof first. Used Raymond's money the way Raymond asked. Bull knew construction. Torres was good with his hands. They worked all summer in the heat, and by fall the Coyote Roadhouse had a roof that didn't leak and a floor you could trust and glass in the windows again. They scrubbed the mirror behind the bar until their ghosts came clear. They got the jukebox running. And Wrench climbed a ladder one October evening and hung the old sign back over the door, repainted in his own hand. All riders welcome. No exceptions. They kept the ledger. It sat at the end of the bar, that leather-bound book, open to a fresh page in Raymond's old style. And the first name Wrench wrote in it a month after they opened was a kid. 20 years old, broke down on the highway, half-starved, too proud to ask for help, rolled his dead bike into the lot at midnight. Wrench fed him, gave him a bed, handed him $40 and a set of tools in the morning, and when the kid tried to promise he'd pay it back, Wrench just shook his head. "You don't pay me back," he said. "You pass it on. Someday when you can, that's the deal." That's the only deal there ever was. And he wrote the kid's name in the book and let it go. Wrench ran the Coyote for the rest of his life. 22 more years. He never got rich. Raymond's money went exactly where Raymond wanted it to go, into meals, into beds, into tanks of gas for men with nothing. The club never did split that Footlocker 9 ways, and not one of them ever brought it up again. They were all of them richer for it in the only way that lasts. Diesel lived 7 more good years and died old on the porch in the sun, and they buried the 3-legged dog next to Raymond under the cottonwood because it seemed right. And here's how it ended, the part you won't believe. When Wrench Kowalski felt his own heart start to give out, an old man of 73 with grease still under his nails, he did the thing Raymond asked. He took what was left, and there was always something left, because a place that gives everything away somehow never quite runs dry, and he banded it up and set it in the bottom of that same green footlocker. He wrote his own letter. Riders across the front in block letters, just like the man before him. He carried it down the ladder into that cool stone cellar one last time, and he set it beside Raymond's flag and Raymond's boots, and he climbed back up slow, and he closed the hatch. Then he sat down at the end of the bar, next to the open ledger, and he looked up at that sign one more time. All riders welcome. No exceptions. A boot had kicked that door open once and started all of this. Now the door stayed open on its own, and it would stay open long after him for the next hungry kid on the road with $10 and nothing else. He smiled. And that was how they found him in the morning, peaceful, home, passed on in every way the word can mean. The door's still open if you were wondering. Some of them always are. Keep the light on for the ones still out there. No exceptions.